Just it's great to be able to come and visit another church when normally we'd be doing everything at
It is
home
such a
church,
blessing to come to worship at another church and just be in the presence of God with no responsibilities. Obviously, really rate church leadership. It's great.
Nice.
But really, thanks so much for having us.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
This is a blessing. We love to share our story. Thank you for allowing a forum for this discussion to take place because, as you said, this stuff does not get spoken about because it's not easy. It's hard. It's painful. You have to go to places where you don't want to go. We're just really grateful. We always try and say yes to talking about our story because it's really important and valuable to us. And we really pray that to others as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you've shared your story with me a couple of times. Would you would you share a little bit of why have I invited you here, basically?
Awesome. Okay, fab. So we lead a church in Middleton, which is great. We love it, and we also have we've had 5 children. Sadly, we've only got 4 here with us now. We've got a 12-year-old as our eldest, a 10-year-old, 7 and 5. 7 and 5. They change, don't they? They grow up. Their ages change. It's hard to keep track. Anyway, 7 and 5. And they're brilliant, wonderful, and amazing kids. But we had a child, our 3rd child, Jethro. He was born in 2013 rather. He was fantastic, a really great bundle of joy. And in 2015, I was training to be a vicar, and partway through my 2nd year, we were pregnant with our 4th, or you were pregnant with our 4th, Jubilee. She was born on the Monday, and we'd spent the Monday waiting. They were all C-section babies, so we were waiting, just passing the time, talking about, what are our hopes and dreams for our kids? What were they going to be like? We'd, decided what each of their characteristics was going to be like. We knew for Jethro.
No, hold on. You just made it sound like we told them what they're going to be.
We knew that we were talking about their character. And
we've been praying about their character. So part of the story is that each of our children have a character we really believe that God's given them. So we have Elijah, Justice. Then we have Eponine, blessing, Jubilee, praise, Jethro, courage, and Boaz, brave. So they all have a character within their name that we really believe that God's given us for that child.
Indeed.
Sorry.
There we go. So we were talking, just waiting in the passing time, playing cards, chatting about what our children were like, saying, Jethro was an absolutely wild child, completely crazy, used to particularly enjoy a party sort of between the hours of 2 and 4 in the morning, which is fine for us most of the time, not so great for Elijah, who he shared a room with. And so we'd had this really brilliant day, welcomed Jubilee into the world, and it was fantastic and wonderful, and we were all really excited. And then Ruth stayed in hospital, I went home, I saw Jethro, who was having one of his little parties about 11 o'clock at night, and sadly that was the last time I saw him alive. That evening he died unexpectedly. He had a virus and an infection that we didn't know about. He'd seen a doctor not long before. He'd seemed like he was okay. He was having a good old jump around in his cot, which was quite normal. But that next morning I found that he died in his sleep. These 2 things had kind of come together in his body. Wasn't able to cope. And I was expecting to be able to sit down with the kids and FaceTime Ruth and tell them that they'd got a new baby sister. They didn't know at that point. And to be able to share this incredible news, and suddenly found ourselves plunged into sort of the deepest despair and just unimaginable pain, realizing that what that joy had suddenly, in the space of just a few hours, turned into absolute pain and grief.
And then that wasn't the end.
That is not the end. So we, obviously, Tony had to come and tell me what had happened, and unfortunately also on that day, Jubilee, the little girl that had just been born, diagnosed with a heart condition that hadn't been picked up in our pregnancy, that was going to need some very significant heart surgery. So we had this amazing joy of a baby being born. Then we had a son that died, and then we had a baby that had been born, but it wasn't as we thought it was going to be. So I know we talked a little bit about this, about when loss takes a different form, when it's not actually a death, which obviously we were dealing with already, when loss takes, so something's not as it would have been, so you're grieving what people would say a normal, healthy child, because we were like, what's life going to look like? We just didn't know what life would look like with a very poorly child. And some of you may have seen her running around. She doesn't look like a poorly child at all. She's amazing and had heart surgery, and we'll have more. But we had to really grieve. There was like a double grief. So it was like of Jethro dying and then of Jubilee's health. And that's a grief that a lot of us carry. And I think a lot of us can really relate to that, especially recently through COVID. Like when things just don't go the way you think they're going to go, and when it takes a lot longer for you to heal from things. So that was where we started our journey of, grief and joy. And it was this thing that we have had to ever since manage, because we have Jubilee's birthday and then we have the anniversary of Jethro's death the day after, which is a tension that is actually unbelievable and some days feels slightly overwhelming. But in time, I think, we're like 7 years ago, but it feels like yesterday on some days, as I'm sure any of you can relate to who've dealt with grief or will deal with it. It feels in some ways a privilege that we get to really rejoice about who he was. Like, he was here for 20 months, but man, like, he really made a mark, like, in 20 months. And so for us, it's holding that joy and loss and that tension. And it's like the now and the not yet. It's so much of like kingdom talk in it. Like, and it's a conversation that's such a long conversation. It's not like, this will be an opening, probably, if you are willing, like, it'll be an opening to the discussion of what loss looks like in life, because it isn't like go and hear a talk and then I'm done. Like, unfortunately, it's, I'm going to journey, and I'm willing to go there, to that really painful place and that dark place. And so for us since then, that has been our journey, is how we manage that.
Yeah, for us, having the two occasions so close together is always a challenge, and it's often the lead up to it is the hardest thing. But we've chosen with our children that we will celebrate Jethro. We celebrate him on what would have been his birthday in July. So we always do something fun, normally going to a theme park, because that's just our safe space, somewhere we know we can have fun. And we celebrate there. And then Ruth and I will often mark the anniversary of his death quietly by ourselves, often, not really particularly with the children. We talk about it, we talk about him with the children, and they're so aware that they have a brother who's not with us. Balancing that tension between celebrating Jubilee's birthday every year, knowing that you're about to hit rock bottom the next day is a real challenge. And that's how we've kind of chosen to do that, because for us, we wanted to celebrate the good stuff about Jethro. And with loss, it's one of those really hard things of trying to work out, do I really want to mark and remember, for me, what was the worst day of my life? Is that something I want to every year be marking? Or instead, am I going to choose a different narrative and instead trying to choose joy in the face of that instead?
Yeah. And obviously you're speaking now with a bit of distance, and so the pain still real, but slightly, less raw. How has that journey been of just processing that loss and the grief of that for both of you?
I think to begin with, I went through like every emotion possible. I think we had to really respect very early that we were going to do this very differently, that everyone is going to deal with this differently. So you were working for the church at the time, and Tony decided like a couple of weeks later, didn't you? You ran a holiday club. Now people were like, why is he running a holiday club? Like, he needs to not be there. Like, and I was like, you need to respect the fact that that's his decision. And I wouldn't have done it, but actually that was right. And that there's nothing wrong with that. It was your story. Whereas for me, I'm a worship leader. I love to worship, and I lost my voice totally for probably a good year. Couldn't sing, and I just thought, how am I ever gonna worship again? How can I ever worship in that way? How can I talk to you, Lord, when I just feel you have, like at that point, we don't use this lightly and we don't talk about this very often, but the thing of someone being taken away, I think it's not very helpful for us. What's the line that we say? Welcomed home. Yeah, we say that he was welcomed home. And because I feel like taken away for me was just too negative, and I wanted to change that language. So we really believe that Jethro is welcomed home. But in that time when it was silence for me, it was to sit in a church. We were working at New Wine that summer, and I remember just sitting there being like, I can talk, but I can't sing. I was like, therefore you feel like your heart starts hardening, because if that's the way you relate to God, and it starts not being that, you'll find that really hard. And even prayers, we were like, well, what do we say? Like, I don't really have anything to say, because the emotion feels too big. And a really great friend of ours, who was Bishop of Southampton at the time, Bishop Jonathan, he said, Ruth, when there are times when you don't know what to say, people have written prayers for you, and gave us, what was it called again? Sorry, I'm like details.
Common worship, the
you might tell.
prayer.
You might tell that I might not be a detail person. I'm like, what's it called? What is it?
The foundation.
Sorry, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Obviously, I should know that it's called the Book of Common Prayer.
It's not even that.
Oh,
it's the more modern version.
Oh, sorry. Well, they have prayers written. So, guys, if you don't know what to pray sometimes, I suggest just Googling that, because they're written for you. And actually,
there's even an app.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, there's an app.
You're really modern.
And there's also things like Lectio 365 and all that stuff. It's so helpful, isn't it? And when you're trying to work through.
So we just started doing them, didn't we? And that was in the morning. We would just do the morning prayer together. And just slowly but surely, things started changing and shifting. And I look back now and we see God's hand literally in everything. We had the only Christian female cardiologist in Southampton, and that was just the person that we got handed to. Now, it wasn't just the person we got handed to, was it? The Lord was in it. And she was just amazing, and she's obviously not allowed to be overtly I'm a Christian, but it became really clear over time that actually we had quite a few mutual friends. And I was like, oh, and then suddenly she said, my son at the weekend at church, and I was like, yes. There were so many things that we see God's hand in, there is that thing of it was so lonely, because grief sadly is a process that's painful, and you have to sit with it, and that's uncomfortable. I chose to have a very small group of girls around me who I told everything to. They knew everything, the things that were okay and the things that were really hard. And they just held my arms, just like the story where Moses held, arms are held. That's what they did for me. And some of them don't even know it, because a couple of them weren't Christians. And they were like, we're just with you, and we want to stand with you. And they were like, by the end of it, they were like, we're praying for you, we're with you. And I think for me, that was the way I handled it, was just, I chose it wasn't choosing, it was God totally was in it. Those people for me were what got me through. And having respect for Tony's journey was going to be really different than mine. Yeah,
it was different. I mean, we chose to grieve together. So we did say, we really wanted to be open and honest about our feelings, but recognizing that we did it differently. So for me, I really remember the day Jethro died was complete sort of crazy day, and it was about 6 o'clock at night. I had the first opportunity. I was actually by myself that day, driving to the hospital. I'm amazed I actually got there, because I can't actually remember that journey much at all, but there was a song that was playing by Bethel that had the line, I am a child of God, in it, and I just found myself singing that song, and then having this conversation with God where I was crying out to him saying, I don't understand what's happened. I don't understand why such joy of Jubilee's birth and Jethro's death. I just don't understand it. But I remember in that moment just having this conversation with him and saying, but I believe you're still king. I believe you're still in charge, and I'm going to choose to trust you. And I was crying and a right old mess by the time I got to hospital. But for me, that was a sort of a line in the sand that I knew God was going to be the constant, and I wasn't going to let that change. And I kind of then just processed on that basis that he is king, and he continues to be. He hasn't somehow stepped off his throne just because this has happened. And that really changed the narrative in my mind, which was really helpful. And so that's why I kind of continued on. You were looking after Jubilee, particularly focused on her in hospital, and I was kind of trying to hold the family together, make sure the kids had food to eat, were at school at the right time, had clean clothes, whatever, doing all that sort of stuff, as well as training to be a vicar at the same time. And for me, I then had opportunities to go away on these residentials every couple of months or every month or so. And at those weekends, when I sort of laid aside all the family commitments, that was when I cried and worshipped quietly and just had people stand with me and share life with me. And so I've got a really precious group of friends that I trained with that just stood by me in those darkest of times. And that then enabled me to kind of carry on kind of doing all that needs to be done and hold the sort of family stuff together in that way. And then as we kind of now through that both found counselling super helpful. That's been an ongoing part of my journey regularly. Yours was kind of more of a block of it. And just being able to process with someone else has just been so helpful and so beneficial. And
you've both described quite different ways of processing. I guess for us, as there's a couple of hundred different stories in the room. What advice would you give to those who want to come alongside, want to be supportive, and want to be helpful? I think you hear lots of. You even project different kind of ideas of what do they maybe do or don't want. What would your advice be for us that
I think what was really shocking for us was we lost a lot of friends over our son's death. People just couldn't handle the emotion of it. And I've actually got to a point now where I'm okay about that. Like if they're just not ready to go there. But we lost quite a lot of really close friends through that. And now I always say to people, we want people to ask about Jethro. We want to talk about him. It's not a shock to us. Like this, we know the story. So we're like, please, let's talk about him. If you're comfortable with it, like, so do you want to talk about Martin? Who's
a really good friend that will just often just send little messages to remind, his memories of what Jethro was like, particularly around what would have been his birthday or around the anniversary. He's just so good at mentioning his name and talking about him. And I think that saying that person's name just is so significant. I think we so often don't want to even mention the name or even say the word death or whatever because we're worried about what it's going to trigger in other people. And often, when we tell our story, we find more often than not, we're the ones that are comforting other people saying, don't worry, it's okay.
I always say, I have to say I'm sorry so much when people say to me like about how many children do you have? And then I say, and they're like, and they'll start crying, and I'm like, I'm so sorry. I'm like, why am I saying sorry to them?
So I think, it is totally like that. But I think just being able to normalise it and reading people's faces. Like for me, I remember walking onto the playground and smiling because I had Elijah I was taking to school, and I was trying to be happy around him, and it probably did feel all right at that point. It was okay. I could get him into school, and then the reality would hit. And people's faces, people weren't very good at reading my face, so they would be like looking away or not speaking or heads down, not wanting to say anything. Whereas actually just smiling meant such a lot. Like, I'm smiling, why don't you smile too? If I'm sad, then, if it's appropriate, come up and comfort me. If you don't really know me, then, stay away. But, that was that reading people's emotions and letting them lead. And then the practical stuff, like we had meals coming out of our ears and cake, like,
there was 2 cake rotors. It's literally brilliant.
Cake is
I had to actually ask them to lay off the cake a bit because it was like, Tony actually texted me going, Ruth, I've got so much cake, I just don't know what to do with it all. And I was like, I'll just ask them to maybe not make any more cake. So just for like a couple of weeks. But practically doing that, I think if you do, we highly recommend the Care for the Family, who we love. They do a really good, on their page, on their website, it's just under their grief support, they have a whole page of do's and don'ts of grief, and it is absolutely brilliant. And we actually started I put it on Facebook and I was like, no one knows what to say to me, just read this first. I was like it's a real we want to talk about Jethro. We're not going to be closed about this. We also love that we obviously have met a lot of people since Jethro died who didn't get to meet him, and they're like, tell us about him. Like, we would love to know about him. And that for us is really special, because it feels like people are wanting to be part of our story, and they want to get it, and they want to be part of it.
And you've set up the Courage Foundation. Tell us a little bit about what that is, what that does.
So for us, we found that Jubilee was in hospital waiting to basically just get fat so she could have the surgery. And so the nurses just said to us, look, you guys, you've got 2 older children. You need to go and spend some time together as a family. We'll get someone else in. You go and have the day. So we went to Paultons Park with the older 2 and suddenly saw the children laughing again and the smile on their faces. That for Elijah particularly, his eyes changed, something about him changed, that sparkle went. And when we went to Paultons and going down the log for him, I remember particularly, this smile just changed on his face, and he was super happy. And we turned to one another and said, this is something we need to do for others. And eventually the Courage Foundation started, which is named after Jethro Courage. And it's all about supporting bereaved children and their families following the death of a sibling or a parent. And we simply provide days out and annual passes to local attractions or to theme parks, so that people can have that sort of safe space and that opportunity to remember, to make memories, to realise that, you know, it's all right to laugh, it's all right to have fun. Yes, someone's died, someone really special has died in our lives, but we can still have fun and we can still make new memories and we can remember him. And for us, around the anniversary, as I said, we go to Paultons or somewhere and we take a cake and we, you know, remember who Jethro was and mark his birthday in that way.
And I think a lot of it is, I think it's been used a lot, this word, since it's really in the last few years, the new normal. I think over COVID, like lots of people use that word, didn't they? But before that, it was really only used around bereavement, because I came across it. And for us, it was getting used to our new normal. It was like that our family unit looked different. And we had to sort of work out what that was going to be like. And so we wanted to help other people with that. And really at theme parks, at places like that, it's all done for you. You arrive and the kids just go and have a great time. There's actually very little energy as a parent you have to put in. So we just wanted to be able to pass that on to others. And we've managed to support hundreds of families so far. We always have a waiting list of over 100, sadly. But we're just a small charity. We have a clothes shop. We sell lots of different clothes, kids and adults. But yeah, we love what we do because it feels like it's like Jethro's legacy.
And I had a little, some of your merch looks fantastic, by the way.
Thank you very much.
One of your jumpers, which I'd highly recommend, says "Choose Joy."
Choose Joy. Yeah. That was for me, especially at the beginning when I was really praying. Probably in the middle of the night, I just felt like God said, "I'm going to help you choose joy," and that's what we're going to do. And so for me and for us as a family, it was about choosing joy in the midst of the awfulness.
Because as you said before that Jubilee's middle name is Praise, and so we just had Jubilee Praise, and then trying to reconcile that choice of name amidst everything else that went on for us. And do you want to share about?
Yeah, and so one night I was praying, I was like, because he hadn't registered her name yet, and I was like, Lord, should we change her name? It feels like this isn't right. We heard wrong, and I was like, well, I'm okay about changing it. I'll just and then literally as I prayed that prayer, I had a message on my phone. Now this is literally the middle of the night, so this is crazy. And a really amazing friend, Katie, messaged and she said, I just feel like God's woken me up and told me you need to know that Jubilee's name is the right name for her. And I was like, okay, yeah, got the message. And it was, and so for us, it's been obviously the most awful journey, but also what we've got from it and what we've learned from it is amazing. And we'd choose to have Jethro here, but we want our story to be helpful for others, to help people choose joy in the face of that darkness and despair. I think.
Brilliant. Guys, thank you so much. We're about to give you a round of applause, but we are so honoured. But just the way that you can articulate, and I think your perspective from a faith perspective of often you just think, gosh, why would a good, loving God allow this to happen? But just your resolute kind of just God is good throughout the way. It's totally inspiring.
Can I just say, so sorry, I really feel this is really important, and this might be for somebody, that it's okay to be angry at God. That's okay, like he can handle it. And actually, as you're honest about your emotion, your heart will change, because that's just what God does. And so I don't know if that's for someone. It just felt really important to say that, because I know we talked about talking about that, that God can handle the anger and God can handle that, and it's okay to go there. Sorry to butt in, I'm really sorry.
Amen. Amen. Guys, would we give these guys a... Brilliant. Well, so our guest speaker for today is familiar to us. This is your third time. You've seen us before, during, and after. Yeah, one online. Dr. Kate Middleton. Kate is a psychologist, church leader, speaker, and author of some brilliant books. I want to recommend two to you that should be coming up on the screen. Stress, How to De-Stress without doing less, as well as Refuel, How to Balance Work, Life, Faith, and Church without burning out. Kate is one of the directors of Mind and Soul Foundation, a fantastic online resource page for mental health, as well as a directory and loads of useful things on there. I'd highly recommend you going and checking that out. She also spends a considerable amount of time explaining that she's not married to Prince William, I imagine, is in fact married to James, and is here today. So we are hugely grateful for you to come back. So would you give her a very warm welcome? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm curtailed in my story selection this morning because James, my husband, and Nathan, my youngest, are here. So, and if I tell too many stories about them, they'll charge me commission. So that should keep me to time this morning. Thank you so much, and Tony Ruth, thank you so much for just an amazing, a powerful testimony, and for your honesty. It's brilliant. It's quite an act to follow, I feel, coming up here. But I want to talk to you this morning then a little bit about this question of, well, the tough stuff, because it's kind of been a slightly rubbish couple of years since I was last physically with you, hasn't it? It's all gone a bit skew-iff and a bit strange. And what I want to talk to you about then is the tough stuff of life, the loss, the trauma, the difficult things, the things that you never wanted to be part of your life story. It's those moments when your brain just goes, no! It's like, I didn't want this. This can't be right. This doesn't feel right. This can't be God's will. This isn't something I ever wanted to be part of my life story. It's those moments when everything in you just fights back against what life has thrown about you. And sometimes that loss, that trauma is obvious. Sometimes, like we've heard stories of bereavement, stories of tragedy, moments of violence, or something so unexpected and difficult that happens in a moment. Sometimes the challenge of loss and trauma is understanding the whys. Why is this tough? Why am I overreacting? Why am I finding this so hard? You know, coming through the pandemic and now coming sort of out the other side, or whatever we call this weird moment we're in now. A lot of people say that to me. They're like, why am I finding this so difficult? Why do I not feel like myself? Sometimes the struggle is understanding the why. And we've already heard, even in moments that have like that obvious sense of this is obviously difficult and tough and traumatic, people's journeys, people's responses are really different. So understanding, like, why is this affecting me so much when it feels like everybody else is absolutely fine? What's wrong with me? Sometimes that's the challenge. And what we need to understand in those moments is that your life, your brain, the way that you understand yourself and the world, it's a bit like a big game of Jenga. Remember Jenga, you know, like with the blocks building the tower, yeah? And we have in our minds, there are core concepts, core understandings, core rules that we believe the world sort of just goes by, things we understand about ourselves and how we interact with other people, the people we love the most and want to keep safe. And it's a bit like Jenga. Some of those aren't too critical. You can push those blocks out, fiddle around with them, move them, and everything's still okay. But some of them are absolutely core foundations. We have built our life on that stuff. And if one of those gets taken out or messed with, or sometimes several are moved around, suddenly everything can start to feel really wobbly. So these are things like basic beliefs about the world that we all hold. We like to believe the world is just, it's fair, it's basically good. Good things happen to good people. If I do everything right, nothing really rubbish will happen. But then something happens, and you just think, why? That's not right. And your brain is literally trying to cope with what that means, therefore, because it's challenged something so huge. Beliefs about yourself. You like to believe you're basically capable, functional, stable, not completely stupid. And then you do something really daft and it has a really bad outcome. That's a challenge for your brain. What does this mean? If I can do that, can I trust myself in anything? Your mind is literally having to restructure to figure out the implications of that. Things about the stability, the predictability, the certainty of the world. I say that now and I just want to laugh because we've all had to learn that actually the world is not certain. You know, I remember the day that Nathan, my son, was sat having his last breakfast before school shut in that first lockdown, and I just remember standing behind him thinking, this is really weird. Like, how can I not send my kid to school? Like, that's just wrong. I grew up with a teacher as a mum, like, you always went to school. And just like my head trying to get to grips with that. These things are difficult because they've shaken our foundations. The other challenge then with loss and trauma is what that means, doing the processing, doing the work that your head literally has to do, like we've heard already, to understand it. What does this mean? How did this happen? But then also, how do I move on from here? Those different foundations influence each other. So if something massive about your understanding of the world is shaken, like maybe the world isn't certain and stable and secure, how does that influence one of the other big things like my identity? How do I now understand myself in the context of that change? If this has happened, who am I? If something has happened that's changed the structure of my family or my job or my world, does that change me? So often they shake other things. There's processing and work that your brain needs to do. And this is about trying to move something big that's happened from something that's current that you're trying to deal with and understand to a place where you can put it away in your like long-term library. It's like stuff that happened, but it's in the past now. And the challenge then is moving from the point of where you just know this cannot be part of my story to actually now I understand how that fits in my story, and here's how I move on, here's how I journey through it. And that's not easy. To do that work and processing, your brain uses emotions, awkward emotions, anxiety, anger, grief, all of these things that we've heard that we don't really like to feel. Part of their job is to keep those things at the front of your mind, to keep your brain focused on it. It's like marinating a stew. Those emotions help your brain to figure this stuff out, but we don't like them. And what that means is that we can end up fighting with our own brains. You know, they're trying to bubble these things up to the surface, your brain. So you're remembering them, you're thinking of them, the emotions are coming up. You're like playing emotional whack-a-mole. Every time it bubbles up, you're bang, I don't want to think about that. And then it bubbles up again and bang again. But your brain needs to find spaces where you can allow that to happen in a safe way. So what I want to do to you this morning with you is just journey through a little bit. That journey, what are the 3 stages that we have to go through? How do we get through this stuff? And if you're facing things now or you're struggling with just getting your head around something, how can you do that in a way that feels less horrible and terrifying? How do you start to put things back together to feel more stable again? And as we do that, I want to just touch on some stories from the Bible, from the Easter story that we've just remembered. Because, of course, what happened in that story when it originally happened was a huge moment of trauma, not just for Jesus, but for the disciples, the guys and the women who'd hung around with him, his friends, the people who journeyed and done ministry with him. This was a hugely shocking moment for them, and despite him having taught them about it, it took them hugely by surprise. So as we look at their journey, we can see them doing some of this stuff and we can understand some of it. So let me start off. I just want to think about one of those guys, first of all, which is Peter. I kind of love Peter. I'm not sure if you're allowed a favourite disciple, but if you were, he'd probably be my favourite. I like Peter because he just he talks first and then he thinks later, which is kind of nice. He's very enthusiastic. I like enthusiasm. And sometimes that goes really well. You can see Matthew 16, if we pop the verse up. This is a moment when it goes really well. Jesus is saying to the disciples, who do you think I am? Like, what do you think is actually going on here? And Peter's the one who leaps in and says, you are the Messiah, you're the Son of the living God. Now, that's some pretty clever theology. I'm studying at the moment. I'm an ordinand. I'm also studying to become a vicar. And, I'm doing quite a lot of quite hard theology. And Peter's really on it there. He says something really quite clever. And Jesus replies to him saying, you're blessed. This wasn't revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by God, basically. And he says this to Peter, who confusingly at that stage is called Simon. That was his original name. But this is the moment. Names at that time, they spoke something about who you were. I love what you guys have done with your kids' names. Exactly that, sort of saying this name speaks something about your identity. And Jesus said, actually, your name is Peter, which doesn't really work in English. In some other languages, including the one at the time, that name sounds like the word for a stone or a rock. And so he says, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church. The gates of Hades will not overcome it. I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. I mean, that's a good moment for Peter. He's like, yeah, I'm glad I said that. That was good. And this is like Jesus speaking something powerful about Peter's identity. Of course, later, if we move on to Matthew 26, so this is the fateful day when something is going to happen and everything is going to change. And Jesus is trying to warn the disciples about this. He's saying this very night, it's going to go badly wrong. And he's saying that there's this stuff that's written that says that something shocking will happen and that these people he's talking to will be scattered. Because when something traumatic happens, it throws us and we can be thrown in different directions. One of the challenges, again, like we've heard this morning, is that when something tough happens, people cope with it differently and some people don't cope at all. And they do say you find out who your friends are when you hit tough stuff. And sometimes what we have to hold when we're the people it's happening to is that some other people can't cope with it. And that doesn't feel fair because it kind of feels like it shouldn't be about them. But the reality of human beings is we struggle, and when tough stuff happens in our radar, even if it's not to us, sometimes it scatters us in different directions. But I love this statement of Peter's understanding of his identity. Because in our identity, one of those foundations is the people we want to be, the people we want to believe that we are. And this is Peter. He says, even if everybody else here falls away on account of you, I never will. He's like, I will follow you to death. I will die for you. That's a strong statement of who Peter wanted to be. But maybe you know the story of what came next. Peter did really well at first when Jesus was taken away to be questioned. He's arrested, he's taken away to be questioned. All the others leg it straight away. Peter, he hangs around like at a safe distance. He follows. He stands by the fire in the courtyard trying to keep track of what's going on. But people keep outing him. They keep saying like, sure, aren't you one of them? Aren't you a mate of his? And 3 times he denies it. And then he remembers that Jesus had told him that this would happen. And there's this really poignant, devastating, grief-filled moment where in Matthew 26:75, where Peter, he hears the cock crow and he realizes that what Jesus said was right. His understanding of who he was, it's not stood the test. And it says he goes outside and he weeps. And the language there tells us, I mean, he's gutted. He's not just like delicate crying. These are like proper sobs, proper like snot crying. But when the language that's used, when it says that he went, it tells us that he didn't just leave physically. In Peter's mind, he thinks he's out of it. He is leaving. It is game over. The story he thought he was part of is over. It's finished. He thinks he has completely messed up because of how he reacted was so different. It's such a devastating blow to his sense of who he is that he thinks it's all over. The first stage that we go through when loss or trauma or tough stuff hits is shock. When something happens and your mind is just reeling and you cannot conceive that this has happened. How could this be true? It is such a blow to your brain that you hit this shock. That's what happens to Peter. When we hit shock, your brain goes into like an emergency mode. It's like the fire alarm is going off in your brain. And what it does is it changes the way literally that your mind works. So you preserve your energy and your focus for the really vital stuff. It turns down, it suppresses your emotional reactions, so you feel oddly numb. Everything feels like slightly surreal, but you're able to function in spite of what's happened. Your stress level is so high because your brain is like, what's going on? And what that means is that it simplifies the way you think. Your ability to think in complex ways and analyze and do all the sort of problem-solving stuff is literally turned right down. And the practical outcome of that is that you start to think in really binary ways, like everything is either one thing or another. It's either black or white. It's good or bad. You are either succeeding or you're failing. People are either for you or they're against you. Everything becomes that simple. If you're not on my side, you are completely against me. Go away. I don't need you at this moment, And the problem then, in a tough moment, in a stressful moment when maybe things aren't going well, is that we so easily believe that the dark one of each one of those options. So things are already rubbish, you're already dealing with something massive, and suddenly you feel like everything is a disaster, you are failing, everybody is against you. So it can feel utterly, utterly overwhelming. And this is partly what drives the instinct to withdraw. Your whole brain is like, get somewhere safe, control everything you can, find the people you love the most, make sure they're okay, and then hunker down, because who knows what else could happen if this has happened. 3 things that we need to bear in mind then about this first stage that are important. So number 1 is that you need to talk. Thing, right? One of the great things about progress in the last 20 years or so is that as a culture we talk so much more about emotional health, emotional well-being. It's great. My colleagues and I at Mind and Soul Foundation, we started 20 years ago just campaigning to get the church talking at all about emotional health and well-being. Now, like, everyone is talking about it, and we're just trying to equip and resource that conversation. But one of the things that comes out of that is that when something bad happens, you get a lot of people who will be saying to you, you need to talk about that. You should probably go get yourself some therapy. Let's sit down and talk. Now, the thing is, all of that is brilliant, and we will come to it. But when you're in that initial shock moment, actually, you might not be ready to talk about it yet. You might feel that's just too much. You can't cope with it. Your head's not in that place. You can't think straight. All of that is okay. And actually, to push yourself or to push someone else to talk too soon can be really quite hard, really quite damaging. What you need in that time is space, compassion, lots of love. All the cake, all the meals. If you're supporting someone else, take practical pressure off them where you can. Do the school runs, all of this. But if what they need is actually for the entire world to go away and to talk to no one, that is okay and might be really, really important. And if it's you and you're like, this is really rubbish, I should be talking and I just can't, don't worry. It's part of the season and the stage you're in. Treat yourself with compassion, care for yourself, find that safe space, hunker down. This will pass. Number 2 is to talk about something called microaggressions. Now, microaggressions are little things that remind you of the big thing. And they're really tough because what they do is they push your brain into that shock reaction, almost as though the big thing had happened again. And particularly at first, just when you're starting to feel like you're coming out of that shock reeling moment, encountering one of those microaggressions hits you like bam, almost as though the big thing had happened again. And they're tough, little things, little reminders, little comments someone might make. And you find yourself back there and thinking, I'm never going to be able to get through this. It's just too hard, because the hit of those things feels terrible. We need to understand as well about microaggressions, why those little things do hit us so big, because this, throughout your journey through something tough, this is a problem. It's the reason why in this season you thought you were dealing with the whole pandemic thing fine, and then you do one of those blasted little tests and you get the second line. So many people have messaged me saying, like, Kate, why am I sobbing like a child? It's not that bad. But the reason is because it's a little thing that reminds you of a bigger thing, and suddenly your brain is like, actually, this whole thing has been a mare, and I'm not sure I've got my head around that at all. It's reminded you of something bigger. It's why, if you've had a row with someone and then you see them in the supermarket, and every rational bit of your adult brain is like, it's fine, you just wave, carry on. But we've all hidden from someone in the supermarket, right? It's microaggression. So the third thing to bear in mind is just time. Give yourself time. It takes time to get through this journey. And where you're trying to get to, of course, is stage 2, which is about the processing. Processing is so important, being able to think it through. I love this story in Luke's Gospel, looking at the journey of the disciples through. When 2 of them they're on the road to Emmaus. That's significant because they're basically going home. They're in shock. They're like, whoa, we're going back to the last safe place we knew. And Jesus comes and he talks with them, although they don't know it's him at first, on the journey. And I love the language that's used, because the word that describes what they do is like words bouncing back and forth between them. And that's beautiful, because processing is basically like playing tennis with your thoughts. So when we're trying to help someone process, we feel like what we need to do is have the brilliant idea, say the inspired, spirit-led comment that solves everything. But no, all you have to do to help someone process is hit the ball back, get the conversation going. Help them to bounce those thoughts around, help their mind to process all of this, what it means, what's happened. If it's you trying to process, there's 3 ways you can play tennis. I know you're like, no, there's not. No, there are. You can play tennis on your own. No, you can. Remember when you were a kid, you used to hit the ball against the wall? You can kind of do that with your own thoughts. Just create space for it. Go for a walk, go for a wander, listen to a podcast, do some journaling, pray, meditate, whatever works for you. One of the most powerful ways of playing tennis that we often forget is, the casual knockabout. Like, no one's keeping score, there's no umpire in a big scary chair. It doesn't matter. You're just bouncing the ball back and forth. That's when you go and hang out with mates. You go for coffee, you have a barbecue together, you just chat. We mustn't underestimate the power of that in processing and dealing with stuff that's difficult, especially at the moment. If you've gone out for coffee with someone and suddenly before you know it, like 2 hours has gone by and you feel so guilty, like I should have done something so much more productive with that time. You did. Maybe that's what your brain really needed. If you're the friend helping someone process, remember that. Sometimes that relaxed, less intense space is the most powerful. Thirdly, of course, though, sometimes we do need to play tennis with a coach. If what you're dealing with is particularly powerful, particularly painful, particularly life-changing, sometimes we need someone who can create a safe space, like a psychological haven where you can deal with some of those emotions that are bubbling up, that are, as we've heard, so unexpected, so unpredictable, and sometimes so powerful. The anger, the anxiety, the numbness that comes up, creating a safe space that you can step into where you also have someone with the expertise to hold that with you and guide you through it. That can be really important and really valuable, so don't forget that. And planning these things, your brain needs to do the processing. So if you want to get through this quicker, if you want to move the journey forwards, create intentional spaces. Think of it like stepping stones across a river. If that river suddenly becomes a flood, you want to know where your next safe step is. So think about it. If you're supporting someone, that may be the big difference. Instead of just saying we'll grab coffee from time to time. Maybe say does Wednesday morning work for you? Why don't we do this every Wednesday? Unless if it's just a bad day, you can text me and say not this week. But otherwise, I will be in this coffee shop every Wednesday at 9. Come and join me. And if you need a space, we can chat. Let's think about how we can plan this stuff. Because where we're trying to get to is step 3, which is that consolidation, that closure space. But we need to try and do that together. And like we've heard, loss, trauma, tough stuff throws us all in different directions. So sometimes part of the challenge is thinking about how do we reconnect? How has all this changed us? How is my journey alongside your journey? Can we find a way where we can converge again? Let me just finish where we started, then thinking about Peter. Because this is an important thing to remember in all of the stuff that we're talking about this morning. In Acts, at the beginning of Acts, which is the book that follows on from the Gospels, we see the story of this bunch of people moving on to the next chapter. And they've been through their grief, they've been scattered, but they've managed to come back together. And it's interesting, Jesus appears to them all in different ways, because they all need something slightly different as they try and process that. But then there is this moment where they're drawn back together, and suddenly we see Peter. But this is a different Peter. He's gone from the broken guy who sobbed and counted himself out. He's confident, he's clear, he's thought this through, he's understood it, he's done the processing. He's leading, he's teaching about 120 of the other followers of Jesus in that moment. So let's just bear that in mind as we finish this morning. Peter thought this trauma was the end of his story. He thought his reaction to it counted him out. He thought it was all over. His brain couldn't comprehend at first when that happened how there could be a way through this, how there could be good stuff that came afterwards. But God was in it. And God doesn't let bad things happen to us like some kind of, psychopathic, heavenly, control freak, just let's see how they respond to this. No. Don't let anyone ever tell you that. But God promises us that in the bad stuff, the tough stuff that happens, because the world is a bit messed up now, he promises he will be there and weave the Holy Spirit through that stuff to bring good stuff out, to grow stuff. Peter's identity that Jesus saw in him grew out of his journey through trauma. That pain that was so awful that God would never have wanted him to go through released something unexpected in him. It released a potential. And so we can't see that. You can't see that at the beginning of a journey. But we can trust that somehow, through God, supernaturally, that stuff comes through. Let me just pray for us as we finish, and then I'll hand back to John. Father God, we just recognize that in this room, we are all individuals, we are all different. Our journeys through the last 2 years have been different. Some of us will have been through stuff that has been so painful, so difficult. Others of us, just life has changed. We're still processing, trying to figure that stuff out. But we just hold all of those things in front of you right now. And we thank you, Father God, for your promise that through all of that, you do weave yourself through whatever life throws at us to bring good things through it. So we pray peace, we pray healing, comfort to those who need it. But most of all, we say, Lord God, send your Holy Spirit to us. Help us to know that we can reach to something bigger, something better, something beyond ourselves in the moment when our brains are reeling and we don't know what to do, that we can trust in you. In Jesus' name, amen.